There are moments when your entire life feels brushed aside by a single sentence, spoken in the calmest tone. That day, I sat at the kitchen table, the one place I'd always believed was my safe haven, when my parents looked at me and said, "This house belongs to your sister. She deserves it more than you." Mora, 34 years old, the eldest daughter in a family everyone thought was close-knit. I was always the one worrying in the background, paying off every cent of the mortgage, scraping together money for hospital bills, desperately trying to keep everyone together, even though no one ever acknowledged my efforts. I thought I'd grown used to being overlooked, that I couldn't possibly be hurt any deeper, until the day I watched my sister's housewarming party being live-streamed, a celebration in the very house I was still struggling to pay off month by month, and not a single person had called or texted to tell me about it. Have you ever felt erased from your own story? Have you ever been excluded from the very family you sacrificed everything to hold together? If you have, let me know in the comments, because this story is for anyone who's ever felt lost in their own home. My family would be called stable by anyone looking in. A quiet suburb, a retired civil engineer father, a mother who once worked night shifts as a nurse at the county hospital. It was just me and Jenna, my younger sister, two girls growing up through a dozen moves every time Dad changed jobs. The house we finally settled in wasn't a fancy mansion, just a slightly worn two-story with an old maple tree out front and a wooden swing Dad built. It was the only real asset my parents owned, apart from the family photos hanging along the staircase and a few worn-out pieces of furniture Mom couldn't bear to part with. I grew up surrounded by that calm, always telling myself how lucky I was not to worry about the next meal, until I realized that peace came at the price of endless, unseen effort. As the eldest daughter, I was the first to leave for college, the first to get a job far from home, then the first to come running back whenever something went wrong. When Mom was hospitalized after falling down the stairs, I was the one who called the ambulance, the one who sat through nights at her bedside, the first to sort out insurance paperwork, and the one who spent hours pleading at the reception desk for a reduction in hospital fees. When Dad retired and his pension couldn't cover the bills, I sent home every bit of savings I could, quietly shelving my own plans, a little vacation, a weekend course, just so my parents wouldn't have anything more to worry about. Maybe I got used to being the support, the one silently shouldering everything, until I couldn't even remember the last time I asked myself what I really wanted. My sister Jenna, 4 years younger, was always the center of every story at home. From childhood, she had a way with words, always knowing how to make our parents proud, even over the smallest accomplishments. When Jenna won first prize in a school singing contest, the whole family threw a party. Dad took photos and posted them to Facebook for all the relatives to see. When I graduated with honors, Mom simply placed a vase of flowers on the table and said, "That's good enough, dear." It wasn't hate, just something invisible that always pushed me to the sidelines, made me the backdrop to Jenna's successes. Jenna was never mean-spirited, but I gradually realized that to our parents, my efforts were nothing more than duties, while Jenna's tiniest achievements were a source of family pride. Sometimes I wondered if I was just too sensitive, or if I'd never truly belonged at the center of this family. My parents always tried to appear fair, sharing words of encouragement with us both. But only those who have lived it truly understand what it's like to be the one who always fulfills her duty, yet is never once celebrated. I used to think that if I just tried a little harder, someday my parents would mention me with pride, but it seemed everything I did was simply expected. Every month I quietly transferred money to cover the house's mortgage, keeping our home from being repossessed by the bank, and not once did I hear a word of thanks. Whenever Jenna needed a car, a new phone, or even just someone to listen, I was always there, while the times I suffered in silence were mine alone. Sometimes, I wondered if love really is conditional, if only those who are good at pleasing others deserve to be cherished. On the surface, our home was always cheerful, family meals full of laughter, but deep down I sensed a distortion, a subtle favoritism hidden behind every sweet word. When Jenna failed her college entrance exams, our parents comforted her for weeks. Yet the one time I missed a family commitment, I was reminded of my responsibilities. I grew used to being the shadow behind every story, even convincing myself that it kept the peace, that so long as the family wasn't disrupted it was enough. But the older I got, the more that sense of injustice simmered inside me, especially as I began to ask if anyone truly saw me, not as a burden bearer, but as a person with feelings, hopes, and value of her own. That's the portrait of my family, a home that seemed united but always harbored invisible cracks. On quiet nights, sitting alone at my desk, I would gaze out the window toward the brightly lit room where my parents and sister gathered, wondering if all my efforts would end up as nothing more than a faint name in the stories others told. But at the time, I still didn't know just how brutally my silent sacrifices would be dismissed, or that everything was only just beginning. Everything started to change when I received a letter from the bank, a cold, impersonal notice that the house we lived in was 3 months behind on payments. I remember standing frozen in the living room, feeling as though the ground beneath me had vanished. My parents pretended nothing was wrong. Mom just said, "Let's deal with it tomorrow." They probably made a mistake, but I couldn't look away. This house was the only place I ever truly belonged, even if I was just a silent member, and I couldn't let it disappear over money. That night I barely slept, tossing and turning on my old bed, my mind spinning with numbers as I tried to figure out how to save our home. At the time, I thought, if I just try harder, if I sacrifice a little more of my own plans, then everything would be okay. The family will be safe, and I wouldn't lose what little I had left to hold on to. I decided to put all my personal plans on hold, shelving my dream of saving up for a vacation after my raise, forgetting about the art class I'd always wanted to take. Instead, every little bit of savings went straight to the mortgage payments. Sometimes I wondered why I was doing it. Was it just duty? Or something bigger, like a naive hope that one day people would recognize my true worth? Maybe I never dared admit to anyone, not even myself, that deep down I still longed to be seen, even just a thank you. A proud look from my mother would be enough to make every sacrifice feel worthwhile. I remember the end of each month. As soon as my salary came in, I'd immediately transfer it toward the mortgage, then recalculate every expense, trying to save every last penny just so no one in the family would have to worry about electricity bills or mom's medicine. The deeper I got pulled into that relentless cycle, the more invisible I became in the face of everyone's happiness and my own personal dreams. I started turning down invitations to meet old friends, always making excuses about family whenever colleagues asked me to travel. I knew all too well, if I ever stopped trying, everything would fall apart. So even when I was exhausted or discouraged, I forced myself to act strong in front of my parents and Jenna. My sister would casually chat about her upcoming trips, new shopping plans, and experiences I could only quietly dream of. Sometimes, Jenna would ask why I never made time for myself. I'd just smile, brushing the question aside, and bury my little hopes in a nameless corner of my heart. I still remember the last time I asked Mom if she was ever proud of me the way she was of my sister. She looked at me, silent for a long time, then gently patted my shoulder and said, "Everyone has their role. You're the older sister. You have to take care of the family." I managed a faint smile, but inside a small part of me broke a little more. Still, I kept going with my plan, thinking that maybe, if I could keep this house safe, everyone would realize I mattered too, that I could be a source of pride, not just the invisible burden bearer. Every time I stepped into the bank to make a payment, I comforted myself that no one else needed to know. As long as I could keep our home, everything would be fine. Sometimes, walking through the hallway and hearing the laughter and chatter from everyone else, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe, one day, Mom would call me over, hug me, and say I'd done something no one else could do for this family. But that small dream always stayed locked away in my heart, a big sister standing behind every story, quiet and alone, sacrificing everything for those she loved most, never needing to be named. I used to think if I just kept trying, things would gradually get better, that all my silent sacrifices would eventually be felt. But reality felt like a wall that only grew higher the more I reached for it, coldly pushing me farther away. I started to realize that family meetings, the big and small decisions about home renovations, even holiday plans, all happened without me. On weekends when I came home, there was only leftover work in the kitchen or unpaid bills for me to handle. All the important choices were already made, tidy and complete, as if my input was never needed. Once I discovered that Mom, Dad, and Jenna had decided to redo the living room. They'd picked the new paint color, bought a new sofa, and even renovated the porch so Jenna would have a spot for her aesthetic photos. I only learned about it from a photo Jenna posted on social media, captioned, "Family is where we belong. Thank you, Mom, Dad, and everyone I love." In that moment, I wondered if any part of those loved ones included me, or if I would always be the one left outside the frame. Sometimes the gentlest words can cut the deepest. Jenna would joke that I worked like a machine. "You only know how to take care of others, never yourself." Every time Mom told me to be more frugal, that "your sister is still young, let her enjoy life a bit. You're older, so you have to think ahead. I felt like a gatekeeper, always guarding the doors so others could rest easy inside. The hardest part was when Jenna started talking about her big plans for the house. How she wanted to turn it into an open space for parties, completely change the layout, and transform the garden into a lavender field like the European villas she saw on TV. I sat there quietly, torn between laughter and heartbreak, because no matter whose name was on the deed, every brick and every square foot had been preserved with my money and sweat. It's not that I wasn't happy for my sister, it's just that I started to wonder how long it had been since I was allowed to speak up, or to dream of anything for myself. I remember clearly the feeling of walking into the kitchen, seeing Mom and Jenna whispering together, only for them to quickly change the subject when I appeared. They'd force a smile and ask me about the electricity bill, or if I'd paid the mortgage, like those chores were simply mine by default, no thanks required, nothing anyone needed to remember. Sometimes, I tried to offer my own small suggestion, maybe new curtains or fixing up the study to make it more comfortable, but everyone just brushed it aside, quickly turning the conversation back to Jenna's plans, their voices animated in a way I'd never heard for my ideas. Each time, I felt like a silent shadow drifting from room to room, invisible but unable to disappear. When Jenna got a job offer in a big city, the whole family threw a party, my parents nearly in tears with pride because, "Your sister has ambition." I smiled and congratulated her too, but inside, I felt an emptiness I couldn't fill. I couldn't remember the last time anyone said such words to me, or how many times I'd swallowed my feelings just to keep the peace. Sometimes, I wondered if it was selfish to want to be loved fairly, or if I was just too tired after all these years of carrying burdens no one saw. When my sister excitedly shared her new plans for the house, my parents listened to every word, while I was gently reminded, "You do it out of duty, that's all," as if all my efforts were just obligations and nothing more. I kept going, paying bills, scraping together money for the house, but more and more, I felt like a stranger in the place I used to call home. Every time I walked past my parents' door, hearing them talk with Jenna and fall silent the moment I appeared, I wondered if I really belonged here at all. The harder I tried to hold on, the more excluded I felt, as if my absence would somehow make the house warmer, the family happier. Still, I stayed, clinging to the faint hope that one day, someone would recognize my worth, even if it was just once. Everything truly hit rock bottom one gloomy Sunday afternoon. I'd just finished making the last transfer to the bank to ensure our mortgage payments weren't overdue. I came home, hoping for nothing more than a quiet meal with my family, just to feel some warmth, even if it was in the form of ordinary, everyday stories. But the air that day was heavier than usual. Dad sat by the window, lost in thought, while Mom quietly picked vegetables for Jenna's bowl before putting her chopsticks down like she had something to say. I sensed something was wrong, but I tried to stay calm, asking about work and health the way I always did, as if that could shield me from whatever was coming. After dinner, Dad suddenly asked Jenna and me to sit down in the living room. The room felt suffocating, the air frozen with words left unspoken. Mom handed me a thin envelope saying it was time for the family to be transparent about everything. I opened it, reading the cold printed lines from the lawyer's office, legal terms about assets, ownership, and the name of the beneficiary. Each word cut into me like a knife. Dad's voice was steady but resolute as he told me they'd decided to leave the entire house to Jenna in their new will. Everything had already been signed, the paperwork done, no one asked my opinion. No one seemed to notice my face growing pale as Dad added, "Your sister deserves it. She's the one who keeps this family close. You just do what's necessary, Mora, but Jenna is the one who brings everyone together." Tried to hold back my emotions, asking in a voice barely above a whisper, "Why her? I paid most of the mortgage on this house. I've handled everything from the smallest bills to medical fees, maintenance and repairs. Doesn't any of that mean anything?" Mom turned away, her eyes shining but without a single tear falling. Dad sighed, his voice heavy. "You're not close to anyone, Mora. You're always distant. The family needs someone who knows how to love, who can make things warm, and that's your sister." Jenna sat in silence, eyes downcast, fingers knotted in her lap. I felt everything inside me shatter. Turns out, in my family's story, I was just a faded backdrop while all the light shone on my sister. Stepped out into the yard, my breath quick and uneven, feeling as if I'd just been pushed out of my own home. All the memories of those times I struggled alone with the bills, the endless nights worrying about Mom, Every hard-earned dollar I'd sent back home, suddenly it all felt meaningless in the face of a few cold sentences. I didn't know what to do except wander along the edge of the house, leaning my head against the old maple tree I used to climb as a child. Tears slipped down my face, unseen by anyone, and no one needed to know. I told myself maybe I just wasn't good enough. Maybe I hadn't done things the right way. Maybe I was simply born to be the extra in my own life. When I went back inside, Jenna was still sitting there, and my parents avoided my eyes. There was no apology, not a single thank you, just the ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder of the slow, burning injustice that had been with me for years. I quietly cleared the dishes, washing them mechanically, telling myself that at least I still had something to hold on to, a habit, a repeated action that helped me salvage the last bit. But that night, lying on the bed I'd known for so many years, I didn't feel at home anymore. All that was left inside me was hollow pain, disappointment in myself, and the aching question, how much effort, how much love does it take to finally be seen as a part of this family? In the days that followed, I gradually faded from family life. I stopped showing up for dinner. The check-in calls became rare, then stopped completely. Waking up in my old room, I looked around at all the familiar things, but suddenly they felt foreign, as if I'd never really belonged here at all. With no motivation to pay another cent toward the house, I quietly closed the banking app, telling myself I wouldn't transfer another dollar. Inside me was a tangled mix of hurt, resentment, and shame, forever hoping to be recognized by the people I loved most. The world outside kept turning. Work at the office still pulled me into its busy routines, but inside, I felt like a shadow, drifting through each day with no direction. I remember so clearly one evening, curled up by the window as the rain fell outside and emptiness gnawed at me inside. I thought about all the times I'd tried to connect, the congratulatory texts I'd sent Jenna that got only polite replies, the small gifts I'd sent home for every holiday, and how it all seemed to vanish without a trace in anyone's memory but my own. Every time I remembered my parents declaring the house belonged to Jenna, it was as if another piece of me was stripped away, exposing an icy emptiness no one could fill. What I once thought of as devotion, as belonging, was now nothing more than a line in a legal document. No name, no trace. I started dodging every conversation, turning down invitations from friends because I dreaded questions about my family. Sometimes, my best friend would call to ask if I was okay, and I would just laugh it off, quickly changing the subject, not letting anyone see how cracked my mask had become. I wandered through the city on late afternoons, stopping at old coffee shops just to watch strangers go by, hoping to find a scrap of peace among unfamiliar faces. But no matter where I went, all I felt was a dull loneliness, the sense of being pushed out, forgotten, and never mentioned. Many sleepless nights, I asked myself if it was all my fault. Maybe I wasn't close enough, didn't know how to please people, didn't know how to be gentle enough to be loved the way Jenna always was. Every memory of being ignored in family conversations, every holiday where only Jenna's name was mentioned on social media, came rushing back like a cold wind. I once believed that if I kept silently enduring, our family would stay whole, that nothing would break, but in the end, I was the one left in the darkness, trapping myself in negative thoughts, blaming myself for existing the wrong way. There were nights I stood in front of the mirror, staring into my own blank eyes, not recognizing the person on the other side. The small goals that used to keep me tied to life suddenly felt unreachable. I lost all excitement, stopped wanting to speak up or demand fairness. Helplessness closed in, swallowing any hope that might have remained. Quietly, I sought out a counselor, not to be healed but simply to have someone listen without judgment. For the first time, I spoke my pain aloud without needing to hide or explain it away. The counselor asked me, "Mora, if you didn't have this family, who would you be?" I fell silent for a long time, unable to answer, because for years I'd lived for them, carried everything so others could feel safe, and had forgotten about myself. Maybe that was when I truly hit rock bottom, when I felt I had nothing left to lose, no one left to cling to, and no more meaning to keep sacrificing. In that cold room, I held myself tightly and, for the first time, let myself sob without caring who might see. I wondered, if everything disappeared tomorrow, would anyone actually remember me, or just pass by like I was a stranger? That's when I realized the worst pain wasn't being cut out of a will or losing a house, but being erased from the story I'd poured my soul into every single day, and I understood. It was time to let go, to stop holding on to anything at all. The days drifted by in a fog of isolation, I lived as an outsider, burying myself in work and repetitive habits just to avoid thinking about the past. Until one morning, I was jolted awake by my phone, ringing off the hook. It was Hannah, my closest colleague, her voice tense with anger and disbelief. "Did you see it yet? Your family's in the news." I was confused, barely able to respond before Hannah sent me the article link along with a flood of screenshots from social media. When I opened my phone, I was frozen in place by a barrage of photos from a housewarming party held in the very home I'd spent my youth fighting to keep. There was Jenna, standing in the middle of the living room in a white dress, beaming next to our parents, surrounded by balloons and a sparkling "Home Sweet Home" sign right on the living room wall I'd repainted one winter night. Everyone was laughing, raising glasses, and Mom made an emotional speech on the live stream. "Jenna is the one who sacrificed everything for this family. She's always been the thread that ties us together. No one mentioned me. No one asked if I could attend. Even in the interview, Jenna was described as the brave daughter who saved the family home from the bank." I scrolled through the comments below the article, seeing praise for the unity and family spirit Jenna embodied. There was even a close-up of Jenna handing the house keys to Mom, both of them crying in each other's arms, everyone's attention fixed on them. In the shadow of the frame, I caught a glimpse of the couch I'd spent months saving for, the vase I'd arranged, the rug I'd painstakingly chosen. But no one mentioned me. My presence was erased from every word, every moment, as if I'd never belonged there at all. The pain was dizzying, icy, unlike any wound I'd ever felt. I just sat there, staring into space, as tears ran down my face. Tears not for losing the house, but because my entire history, all my memories and effort, had been rewritten, replaced by a new story, a story where I was just an outsider. The final blow came when I read the part describing Jenna as the one who sacrificed her own career to save the home, while I, the one who had sacrificed years, was mentioned even once. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with Hannah's messages. She couldn't hide her outrage. "Mora, you're the one who paid the mortgage. How can they erase all your work like this? How can Jenna get all the glory while you suffered in silence for years?" Hannah sent more photos, documents with my name on the deed, payment receipts, evidence no one could deny. And in that moment, something inside me snapped awake. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt by being excluded. I was furious at the blatant injustice, and at how my family had rewritten the truth to make me into an invisible shadow. I realized that, if I kept staying silent, nothing would ever change. I would always be the one written out of my own life, letting others tell my story however they pleased. In that moment, I knew it was time to stand up, not just to protect the truth, but to reclaim my own worth, the very thing they had tried to erase with their lives and glittering photos that never included me. The pain inside me hardened into a strange resolve. I wiped my tears, opened up every email and bank receipt, gathering all the evidence I had quietly collected, and, for the first time, I felt no fear, only determination that I would never let anyone erase my existence again. Spent the whole afternoon combing through paperwork, digging up every bank transaction, every bill with my name on it, all the things I had once thought were simply the natural duties of a daughter. The cramped air of my new apartment suddenly felt oddly liberating. For the first time in years, I was no longer running from the truth or afraid to face my family. I picked up the phone and called my father, my voice steadier than I expected. "We need to talk about the house." He hesitated, but I gave him no chance to avoid it. I sent a flood of photos of bills, mortgage agreements, along with a short message. "You may have forgotten, but I never stopped carrying this burden." Without waiting for an explanation, I firmly hit send, promising myself I would never bow my head again. The next day I arrived at the house with a calm I had never known before. The party was over, the balloons deflated, the house silent. But I knew it was still full of people who had once decided I didn't matter. Jenna opened the door, her eyes darting away, and Mom hurriedly boxed up family photos from the wall as if she was afraid I'd see them. I walked straight into the living room, the same room that had been the heart of that lavish housewarming just a week earlier, breathing in the familiar scent of the home I'd worked so hard to preserve. I spread every document across the table, every contract, every bill with my name, every bit of proof of the money I had quietly sent over the years. My parents sat across from me, neither daring to meet my eyes, and Jenna sat trembling, her fingers clenched so tightly they turned white. Without a single tear, I told them about all the days I had carried their burdens, about the little dreams I'd pushed aside to save the house, about the loneliness of always living for others. Every word cut through the fake peace they had tried so hard to maintain. I don't need anyone's thanks, and I'm not asking for anything for myself, but no one has the right to erase my name from the house I kept standing, from the story of this family. Then, with no hesitation, I delivered my decision. I would stop all payments, and had already informed the bank that I would no longer be responsible for the mortgage from this month onward. If Jenna was truly the deserving one, let her pay for everything she was receiving. The air in the room thickened. A long, heavy silence, until Mom finally broke down and apologized, her voice shaking like wind at the window. Dad stammered some explanation about just wanting to keep the family together, insisting they hadn't realized how much it would hurt me, but it was all too late. Jenna looked at me, lost and fragile, so different from the confident girl in those glossy newspaper photos. I met all their eyes and for the first time in my life spoke clearly. From today, I will no longer be a silent shadow. I'll live for myself, and I won't let anyone define my worth except me. With those final words, I walked out of that house, back straight, head held high, feeling lighter than I ever had. Outside, the sky was clear. I took a deep breath, knowing that from this moment, my life was truly starting over, not as anyone else's, but as my own. I left the old house one early autumn morning, taking little with me but a few books, a small suitcase, and the cat I'd rescued as a child. My first steps down that unfamiliar sidewalk, I realized the air I breathed seemed fresher, my shoulders lighter, as if I'd finally shaken off the invisible chains that had held me for so long. I rented a small apartment at the end of the street, its window overlooking rows of oak trees. Not fancy, but peaceful enough for me to listen, at last, to my own thoughts, and the beating of my heart after so many years living only for the silent sighs of others. In those first days, I couldn't escape the emptiness. Sometimes loneliness still crept up as tears when night fell, but this time I didn't run from it. I let myself cry, let myself feel sad, let myself remember, and finally allowed myself to forgive, for having endured too long just to hold on to a family that no longer belonged to me. I spent time on the little things I used to neglect, brewing myself a fragrant cup of tea in the morning, sitting by the window for hours with a book, trying to sketch out the unfinished dreams I'd left behind in my youth. Gradually, I began to see my own smile in the mirror, not a forced smile for someone else's sake, but the smile of a person who had finally found herself after all the storms. One time, my mother sent me a long email, telling me she couldn't sleep, apologizing for not understanding my pain all those years. My father called, asking casually about my work and the cat, not offering an apology, but I could hear the awkward regret in his voice. Jenna texted me, no longer boasting but quietly asking if I was okay. She confided about the difficulties of dealing with the bank and how for the first time she understood the anxiety when the rent came due. I read it all, with no resentment, and no rush to return. I understood now. Healing doesn't come from anyone else's recognition. It begins with forgiving myself, for all those years spent trying to please everyone else, and for forgiving those who made me feel unimportant. I rebuilt my new life in my own way. I accepted invitations to travel with friends, finally signed up for the art class I'd postponed for so long, joined a small weekend book club just to chat with strangers who knew nothing of my past. I worked hard, but this time, every achievement was for myself, not for anyone else. I learned to love the small things, from a gentle afternoon sunlight on the balcony to the pride I felt in finishing a painting. My new life wasn't loud or glamorous, but it was filled with freedom and peace. Even though old memories sometimes resurfaced, even though every holiday I felt a twinge thinking about the family dinners where I no longer had a familiar seat, I knew I had grown from all that loss. I no longer craved recognition from my parents or Jenna. I defined my worth by living honestly, by loving, and by drawing clear boundaries for my own happiness. If anyone asked whether I regretted letting go, I'd simply smile and say no, because sometimes, it's only when we dare to walk away that we truly find where we belong. Share my story here not to complain or reclaim anything, but to send a message to anyone who has ever felt lost in their own family. You are not invisible. You are not anyone's shadow. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for your worth, even if it means facing the whole world. If you've ever felt excluded or hurt by not being recognized, share with me in the comments. Let's find the strength to begin again, if only with the smallest first steps.